Hugh Hewitt Show begins in 5 seconds.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Good Monday to you this Thanksgiving week. From inside of the Beltway, I am Hugh Hewitt. Thank you in the ReliefFactor.com studio. Biggest story of the day is overnight, Hong Kong voted in their local elections. 452 seats up. 389 of them went to pro-democracy candidates. 389 out of 452. That 389 is up from 124. The government's allies hold just 58 seats. It's a collapse from 300. Quote now from the Civic Party's leader, Alan Leong, there has been a very deep awakening of the Hong Kong people. You betcha, they are the men and women of the year. And what an extraordinary display of courage and resolve. 70+% participation and turnout. I was in Hong Kong in February, overwhelmed by the city's energy activity, complexity, and vibrancy, and China needs it as its engine. So I am hopeful General Secretary Xi will take the opportunity to say, you know, this is a great victory for one country, two systems. Carrie Lam is leaving, going to put a pro-democracy mayor in, chief executive. And we're going back to the table with the United States. And look, it might be shui, as our friend Michael Pillsbury calls their correlation of forces doctrine, to retreat at strategic times. But this is a time to definitely reconfigure. This is definitely a time for General Secretary Xi to say, oh, my gosh, I can't do Tiananmen against 389 elected members of their legislature, much less people in the street. Better recalibrate. That is my hope. That is my prayer this Christmas season. That is the big story of the day. Not a big story of the day, what the Washington Post published last night about there being documents concerning after-the-fact conversations about the hold on Ukraine aid. As a alum of the White House counsel's office, I'd be shocked if there wasn't. But it came up on Politics Nation last night, where I joined Al Sharpton, Jonathan Capehart, after the Browns won their third in a row. Here is that segment, cut number one.
Well, let's get into that with my panel. Jonathan, your colleagues at the Washington Post broke this story. How will this and could this affect the impeachment proceedings?
Well, it'll affect the impeachment proceedings in that it's new information. Remember, one of the contentions during the hearings was that the White House was limiting the release or preventing the release of some emails. It was also the State Department that came up in several of the witnesses who testified. And so what this does is it's just a few more drops in the bucket, or a few more pieces, I should say, in the puzzle of what happened, what was going on. The key thing in the story, Rev, that hasn't been, that Richard didn't talk about in his great report, is that Mulvaney's request, this is quoting directly from the story, Mulvaney's request for information came days after the White House counsel's office learned that there was a whistleblower complaint. And
this
so
came,
what makes
let me make sure we have this right. This came from Mulvaney, the chief of staff, after they were made aware there was a whistleblower.
That is correct. And so what that points out is that the acting chief of staff was trying to find a way to basically backfill explanations for why there was a hold on the aid to Ukraine. And so that's why this is a breaking news story. This is one more piece in the puzzle that goes to evidence that shows that the administration was withholding aid authorized by Congress that was supposed to go to Ukraine that was being held up because the president was looking for and insisting from the new president, Zelensky, that they open up investigations into so-called corruption. But what we now know that to mean was investigations into the oil and gas company Burisma and into Vice President Biden and his son Hunter.
Now, when we hear this breaking news, it raises the question, if there were these flurries of emails that started after they were aware there was a whistleblower, it would lead one to believe that they were trying to cover something up, because if, in fact, they had used appropriate or proper procedures, there would be no need for a flurry of emails. Does this look to the public and to the congressional committees that have interrogated people like this is a big deal, because they appear to be operating only because they know, or at least in large part because they know there's a whistleblower and this could become a problem?
Well, good evening, Alan. Happy Thanksgiving. I hate to rain on everyone's parade. I know the reporter Josh Dawsey and his colleagues have got great reputations, Carol and Tom. But what this adds is a lethal dose of dullness to an already underwhelming impeachment. When you get into the nitty-gritty of the Congressional Budget Impoundment Act of 1974, you're going to kill the audience. I mean, you're just going to kill us. Already it's turned against impeachment. The Adam Schiff show trial has not succeeded in carrying the day. They've lost ground, 6 points in the Emerson poll, a bigger swing in the Marquette Law School poll. The American people don't like this, and the fact that some people are alleged to have asked the White House lawyers, which is what you're supposed to do, about whether or not what they were doing was legal, that strikes me as interesting to me as a White House counsel alumni. I mean, that's what I used to do, is to make sure we were crossing our T's and dotting our I's back in the Reagan administration. But it doesn't strike me as a headline grabber, and it does, I think, underscore the weakness of the congressional case that we're talking about, the congressional budget impoundment.
I get all of the dullness thing and all of that that you claim, but the fact of the matter is, if in fact there was a U.S. Congress vote that gave this country, the nation of Ukraine, who was under military fear from Russia, and they said, we're going to give these $391 million to them, and it was withheld because the President of the United States was trying to extort them to announce an investigation against his potential opponent. And now there is a paper trail that once they found out there was a whistleblower, that they were trying to, in fact, cover how they made the decision about disobeying what the Congress had voted. Dull, you can say all you want. That speaks to a very serious issue, and it questions whether the executive branch can, in effect, neutralize what the legislative branch had voted to do. You can call it dull, but it is a real issue.
Well, I just got to disagree with you, because some of the testimony that I'm sure most of us heard, and Jonathan probably heard, was that impoundments on a temporary basis are not routine, but they are not abnormal, that they happen all the time, that one was in effect in Pakistan, one was in effect, and there were two other countries that came up in the exchange. Frankly, I can't remember anything from this dull set of hearings, but the fact that the Congressional Budget Review Impoundment Act of 1974 is on the table, that tells me they're desperate. I know, Jonathan, you are going to disagree. Democrats are desperate because they did not carry the day in the last 2 days. That's enough. That's enough. Jonathan did disagree vehemently. He was very agitated, but I want to get to the it was fun last night. And my mailbox is full of applause, isn't it, Dwayne? You looked at the mailbox this morning. Isn't it full of, boy, you're great, and we need you back?
There was lots of reaction to you, and it was one, voluminous, and two, intense.
Intense, and so I just assume it's applause. Let me applaud you, audience, but also kick you in the butt. I need to thank everyone who's already joined my online red kettle for the Salvation Army at HughHewitt.com. I do this every year in just 4 days. Listeners like you have donated $40,000 to my campaign to help our fellow Americans in need. And as you can hear, folks really like the case and the ease of donating online.
Everything's switching, and I think people would do it more if it was like in their hands.
The move makes it easier for donors to join in on what the Salvation Army calls their fight for good, raising money for programs in the community for families in need.
I think it would be more effective if it's online.
I think it's wonderful because a lot of people who are technologically savvy are much more apt to donate if they have that capability.
In its 129th year, the Red Kettle Campaign is one of the oldest and largest charitable campaigns in the world.
Dale Bannon is going to join me in hour 3 from the Army. And I'm really impressed at 4 days, 40,000, but I need to get to, I wanted to raise $250,000 for the Salvation Army because Chick-fil-A tossed them out. They've been banished by Chick-fil-A because of political correctness, and they've been on the receiving end of LGBTQ plus community aggression and saying, Chick-fil-A, get out. So Salvation Army has to make up a deficit. And that deficit means addicts not served, hungry people not fed, children without presence, homeless people without shelter. Salvation Army does each and every one of those things. And if you can give $5 or $50 or $500 or $5,000 or $50,000, whatever you can give, if you give it online today at HughHewitt.com, I am grateful. And the people, store up blessings in the storehouse you can't see with the Salvation Army at HughHewitt.com. It's at the very top of the webpage. You'll see the red kettle there. Please donate now. Please go and do it right now. Thank you. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. On the Salem Radio Network. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Back inside the Beltway after barnstorming with my colleagues on the Salem Radio Network and the War for America Soul Tour. By the way, if you go to HughHewitt.com, you'll see the Salvation Army kettle on the top. And thank you, Terrence Allison, for donating $52 during the break. But you'll also see right below the Salvation Army kettle the War for America Soul. You can watch the event in Tampa Bay, Sarasota with me, Mike Gallagher, Dennis Prager. You can watch the one in Sacramento with Larry Elder and Seb Gorka and Michelle Melkett. You can do all of that over at HughHewitt.com. Just find it and click it and watch it. It's a great gift as well. You can get someone that for Christmas. So donate to the Salvation Army and then go and watch the War for America Soul. It's Christmas time, so you got to start buying things. I'm holding in my hand Sacred Duty if you're watching on Town Hall TV. The easiest gift to give anyone who's a veteran or on active duty is Senator Tom Cotton's great book, Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. I also like Ruth Marcus's new book, Supreme Ambition, a lot. We'll talk with her next week. Right now, though, I want to play you the second segment on the Reverend Al show last night. Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post, me and the Reverend Al talking Democratic politics.
Back with me are Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post, and Hugh Hewitt, a conservative radio talk show host. Jonathan, let me go to you first. You've worked with Michael Bloomberg. What do you think about his announcement?
Right.
Is there a path for victory for him, and do you think he can win the nomination?
Okay, well, yes, I worked on Mike's first campaign for mayor as a policy advisor. The question I have is it a viable strategy to skip Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina and still win the nomination? And the second and the most important thing is, will he be able to get black votes? And stop and frisk, the police policy in New York during his 12 years as mayor that stopped and frisked millions of African-American and Latino men. There are people in the city who lived through that. It was very traumatic. And there are raw feelings about that in the city and around the country. So it's going to make his getting the black vote very, very difficult.
If by some happenstance, Michael Bloomberg got the nomination, do you think he would be a real threat to Donald Trump in the general election if Donald Trump is, in fact, the nominee of the Republican Party?
I do, Al. I think Mayor Bloomberg is in that sweet spot of the center left that does have to alarm Republicans. I also have to do full disclosure. I've given scores of donations over the years. The only one that ever went to a Democrat went to Deval Patrick. I think the governor is a formidable entry into the race. I think he's got extraordinary talent and experience. So we'll see how that plays out. But right now it's Elizabeth Warren versus Pete Buttigieg. And I don't know if either of them are there in time to make a dent. I always thought Kamala Harris would be atop the Democratic race at this point. But as I think her interview with you showed, she's kind of desperate now. And the impeachment is an anchor around her, as it is around every Democrat who's not in the lead. I'll watch Deval Patrick and the mayor very closely. But I think we're frozen in the Warren Buttigieg choice.
Do you think Deval Patrick, because he's not waiting to go to the other Super Tuesday states, him coming in early, do you think he has any way of catching up you since you have written him a check? Not for this campaign.
I do. I think that the more people see him on the stump, particularly outside of Iowa, he already is well known in New Hampshire because of the New Hampshire media market is dominated by the Boston stations. I think he'll do well in South Carolina. Defer to Jonathan and you on the Democratic Party. I just look at his resume and say he's formidable, and his backstory is very, very compelling.
What do you think,
that's enough
Jonathan?
of that. We'll come back. I'd like you to clip my last segment when Al asked me straight up who's going to win. I'll play that in the next segment. Let me remind you, the Salvation Army Red Kettle is open and swinging. Please, let's start your shopping week and your preparations for Thanksgiving. Thank you, Angela Nightswander. Just donated $200. Thank you, Angela. God bless you. It really is. The Salvation Army is doing
returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt's big game week. The Buckeyes will crush that team up north. I am so pleased to welcome Tony Sayegh, the White House Senior Advisor for Strategy, newly minted. He's back in the service of the Trump administration in the West Wing. Good morning, Tony. How are you?
Hugh, great to be with you and your listeners. Thanks for having me.
Now, I want to begin. Since you are the strategic advisor to the president, can you walk down the hallway and say, Mr. President, put the G7 in Detroit? Now, you don't know how much that pains me to say, even though I went to Michigan Law School, but they've got the capacity, they've got the attractions, they've got a renaissance on their hands, and you got to get that in the red column in 2020.
Yeah, and that's a very good idea, Lou. Hugh will be sure to make sure that's discussed. And look, I think there hasn't been a president who's focused more on revitalization of Michigan and the entire upper Midwest than Donald Trump. It's focused on, obviously, jobs and on renegotiating bad trade deals. This is a president who I think has, kind of top of the list and top of mind the idea of restoring America's workers to their greatness and giving them a level playing field. So that impacts a whole part of this country that for too long was neglected by policy in Washington.
And you could you could take Macron and the rest of them up to the UP and to Mackinac Island, then bring them back down to Detroit. I can't imagine going to Ann Arbor. That would be a bad thing. Again, no offense to my law school, but it's just, this is not the time to be talking up Michigan as much as I am. Tony, let me ask you about what the president tweeted.
Hugh, is this a bad time for me to tell you I'm a Michigan fan?
I know you are, and I just Chase Young is going to crush you. I hope you know that. You're just going to absolutely be Chase Young is a wrecking ball. Tony, before I go to asking the president's tweet, you were the deputy mayor and trustee of Tuckahoe, New York. I believe in local service. I served 17 years on an Orange County commission. How much did you enjoy that? That's actually down in the trenches delivering services.
Oh, I love that opportunity to serve my community. You know, I was a kid who grew up in Tuckahoe. I focused most of my youth even in trying to get involved in civic involvement, and I had a lot of mentors in my community. I ended up going to GW for my undergraduate degree in political science and graduate degree in public administration. There was no better way for me to kind of give back to that community that at a young age. I think I was 26. I was asked to run for local office. I was proud to do it, and it really was one of the real highlights of my ability to start my public service career.
It's terrific. People should know the backstory. Now, Tony, I want to ask you about the president's tweet 41 minutes ago. Quote, support for impeachment is dropping like a rock, down into the 20s in some polls. Dems should now get to work and finally approve USMCA and much more. Now, I pointed out on the Reverend Al show yesterday, John and Capehart and others were very upset that impeachment has fallen in the Marquette Law School poll. It has fallen in the Emerson College poll. I think the middle of America has turned decisively against the Schiff show trial, but I haven't seen anything in the low 20s. What's he talking about?
Listen, you're gonna probably end up hearing a lot of depleting support for, as you've indicated, by the way, for impeachment. Polling is made public. There's some polling that we see internally as well. The bottom line remains, you talked about the Marquette poll. Impeachment is down 13 points in Wisconsin, which is a key battleground state. The probably worst data point for Democrats in the Emerson poll is that among independents, support for impeachment is only 34%. Opposition is 49%. The 538 average shows that there's been a complete flip in the average of all polling on impeachment to now where it's less popular than it is more popular. So we have a dynamic here where the American people have been able to see what Adam Schiff and the Democrats have kind of shammed together, and they don't like it. They don't think it has anything to do with their lives. They're not issues that are important to them, and they just see Washington wasting their time on a hyper-partisan process. That ultimately, Hugh, is a pointless process because we all know that there's nothing here that's remotely impeachable, and if Democrats are foolish enough to move articles out of the House, they're never going to get a removal in the Senate. The Republicans in both chambers are very unified. And in fact, if you're going to have any movement, you're going to have Democrats voting to oppose impeachment because the evidence is just not there to substantiate it.
Tony Sayegh is my guest, White House Senior Advisor for Strategy. Tony, I was on, again, with Reverend Al last night. The segments are posted over at HughHewitt.com. And Jonathan Capehart, who is my colleague from the Washington Post and MSNBC and NBC, got rather agitated with me because I simply said, this is over. And this whole Washington Post story today about the White House counsel doing its job, I'm a veteran of the Reagan White House counsel office, that's a lethal injection of dullness when you start talking about the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974. You've thrown up your hands and given up. But within that bubble, within the echo chamber, within the resistance, they don't seem to understand that the country has turned thumbs down on this.
You know, Hugh, there was a very interesting article, and I've never really done this, so I'm breaking news on your show. I'm citing a Vanity Fair article, which you all know Vanity Fair is not exactly the most friendly news outlet toward Republicans, certainly not toward the president. But Vanity Fair even had an article that basically discussed how dangerous it was for Democrats to pursue impeachment because of how unpopular it was, particularly with independent voters. And Vanity Fair rightly says what I've known, for a long time as a political strategist: you lose when you talk about issues you care about, not issues the people care about. And that's exactly what's happening inside the echo chamber that you just described between the hyper-partisan Democrats on the Hill and their allies in the media. Is they're only increasing the intensity of their own animus toward the president. They're not increasing the intensity of people's views as to whether he should be impeached. Quite the opposite. So there's a real problem in our system. When the elected representatives, instead of choosing to do the people's work, do the work of a very small select group of partisans. And that's why I suspect this week over the Thanksgiving recess, a lot of these members, particularly these 31 Democrats in districts that the president won, are going to probably get an earful, especially because there's been no progress made on so many important issues like trade, like infrastructure, like immigration, like lowering drug prices, which, by the way, healthcare was the biggest issue Democrats ran on and think they won the House on in 2018. They're not doing a thing about any of these issues because they're so tied down and bogged down with this, pointless impeachment process.
No, I want to come back to that in just a second, but since you are the White House Senior Advisor for Strategy, would you please advise the president he needs to do morning drive radio on the only nationally syndicated morning drive show? Because that's talking to people on their way to work. You can do Fox and Friends, but people can't watch TV on their way to work. They can listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
You're with a lot of good ideas this morning that I'll be happy to sit back and discuss. By the way, we are here Thanksgiving week. I have to suspect Wednesday is a pretty good time to be on the radio with everybody traveling across the country to be with their families for the holiday. You
tell the president he can have 3 hours if he wants. We'll just go wall to wall with him. Now, Tony, you do mention what hasn't been done. And I want to stress to people that the USMCA will benefit millions of Americans, both consumers and workers. Millions of Americans are being held hostage to Adam Schiff's show trial in Nancy Pelosi's, box canyon of political doom. When do they wake up and cut their losses? Sunk costs are apparently not a concept they are familiar with.
Yeah, this is an actual interesting point right now in this whole process because Nancy Pelosi, who many people, even those who disagree with her, hold up as a very astute practitioner of the House and of politics. Many will say she didn't want to get to this point that, back in March, if you remember, she said she didn't want to go down the road of impeachment unless it was done in a bipartisan way. That's clearly not the case. In fact, the bipartisanship is the opposition. But now Nancy Pelosi, having agreed to follow Adam Schiff's, colossal political miscalculation here by pushing impeachment so blindly, has to decide, who is she going to help? Is she going to try to work toward the base of her party and a very small handful of hyper partisans in her caucus, or is she going to work on behalf of the American people and allow the members that she worked so hard to get elected in 2018 to do their jobs and serve their constituents and move past this whole ridiculous idea that anything impeachable has occurred? And I think it's obviously something that she's going to have to consider because right now, the Democrats are trying to push this impeachment train as fast and furiously as they can because they know the more it's out there, the more it drops in approval and the more it becomes a huge political liability for them.
Now, Tony, I know from your time with the Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin, you understand the difficulty of the relationship with the PRC. I am a strong advocate that the president signed very publicly the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act of 2019. Will he do so?
Yeah, that's obviously going to be a decision the president's going to have to make. And I think he's been, somebody who's not shied away from those questions. So you should feel free to ask him and members of the administration working on that issue when he comes perhaps on your show, Hugh, which you've lobbied for this morning.
I always lobby for stuff like that, but I really do. In case you see him, here's my pitch. General Secretary Xi has an opening right now to change the narrative, take the Hong Kong election, say one country, two systems work. Let's make a deal with America. Let's ease up on the Uyghurs. Let's renew ourselves. And the president can push him that way. And they have a good relationship, right?
Yeah, they do. The relationship between President Trump and President Xi is very productive. It really was solidified in their first meeting back in, I believe it was April of 2017 down at Mar-a-Lago, and moving to the concept of trade, which is the issue I have worked on very closely, as you point out, during my time at Treasury with Secretary Mnuchin and Ambassador Lighthizer. We would not be at the point we are with the possibility of a strong phase one deal with the Chinese if it weren't for the leadership of the president and, frankly, the relationship that he has been able to build with his counterpart in China.
Well, I am very glad that Ambassador Lighthizer has access to he's from Ashtabula, Ohio, where all four of my grandparents were born, raised, lived, and died, and therefore he will offset your Michigan bias, Tony Sayegh. I don't want the president to walk into that crossfire. He should stay far away from the game, but hopefully on the Hugh Hewitt Show on Wednesday. Thank you, my friend. Good to have you on.
Great to be with you, Hugh. Thank you so much.
That's a good bit of lobbying work, don't you think, America? Let Donald Trump 3 hours. He can co-host the show with me. That would be terrific. Don't know if it's going to happen. We'll keep you posted on that. He could also make an appeal for the Salvation Army Red Kettle campaign because I'm telling you right now, you folks are just so great. Lauren Pusateri Woods, Carol DeCesare, Daniel Campbell, Arthur Monahan, anonymous donors all over the place. Carol Enberg, Robert Brackner, thank you all. The Salvation Army needs every single dollar. And I really appreciate your stepping up. The Chick-fil-A abandonment of Salvation Army creates a hole in the budget, and I'm counting on the Hugh Hewitt audience to help fill it. We doubled our donation this year, and I hope you will as well. And if you're new to it, understand how effective they are. Understand that you can make a difference for the lost and the least, especially the addicted with nowhere to go. The fentanyl scourge is real. It is everywhere. Salvation Army is the front line. Help them out. Let me also remind you, ReliefFactor.com. There it is, the beautiful North Carolina blue bag, lime green edges, and inside of it, of course, as I'm showing you, I'm almost down to the end of this bag because I take it every morning on the first hour of the show. I remind you twice more in the course of the day. If you got a long commute today, if you're driving somewhere for a long time in an uncomfortable car, which for every reason is bothering your knees or your back, ReliefFactor.com can help you. Give it a chance. $19.95 gets you started. Join tens of thousands of people who take it every single morning, like I do, and who swear by it. And Seth and Pete Talbot, wonderful son and father team that got it started, are just wonderful people. I talked to them last week at length, as a matter of fact. I was stuck on the Bay Bridge from Maryland, getting back into the safe zone of Virginia. Whew, Maryland. Can't believe we let them into the Big Ten. But I was talking with Pete and Tony, and they are just wonderful people, and they strongly believe in serving you and in serving the community. Take care of yourself. ReliefFactor.com. Come on back for the final segment of today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by the Salvation Army.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Time for my segment on things I don't understand. Now, this doesn't come up often because I understand most things, but there are two things I don't understand. I do not understand why NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell decided on Friday of last week, immediately, without any factual inquiry, without any review, without any counseling, to make Cleveland Brown, Myles Garrett grovel for reinstatement into the league. Because it just seems to me that he did a horrible thing. Throwing the helmet at the guy's head is a bad thing. He should have been suspended 4, 5, 6 games, but a definite suspension would have given him a chance to come back onto the field, get the stink off of this action. He is a fine young man, and everybody knows it. And right now, for that assault, which was provoked by Mason Rudolph, was provoked by him. Doesn't excuse Myles Garrett, but it would be a factor in any adjudication of punishment. Swinging the helmet at him, not only indefinite suspension, not only damage to brand, took away $1 million from Myles Garrett. You know what that is over the lifetime? That's over $100 million in opportunity cost. That fine for that swing provoked by that guy while he was being kicked and scrambled on, etc. $1 million becomes $100 million over his lifetime for a kid who came up from nowhere and is a good kid. Roger Goodell, make him beg. Now, by doing the same thing to Josh Gordon, he pretty much fried Josh Gordon's career. I don't know, he didn't know anything about addiction. Roger Goodell is really the worst sports commissioner of a major league in my lifetime. So I don't understand that. I don't understand how NFL writers are not focused in on the whimsical justice, that's in big quotes, of Roger Goodell. It is a scandal. As was Myles Garrett's abuse of his power and build, as was Mason Rudolph's charging and his actions. It was a mess for everyone. But this is so unjust. Second thing I don't understand, how could the Miami Dolphins have traded Jarvis Juice Landry? Maybe the best receivers the Browns have had since their return, and a definite all-pro this year. I don't understand those two things. Maybe you can help me out. I also want to tell you that among all of the gifts you can give to anyone out there this Christmas, I've told you about Sacred Duty, Tom Cotton's terrific book. I'm holding it up on the Univision, Town Hall TV. That goes to any vet, any active duty serviceman. They will love Sacred Duty. They're always hard to buy for. My late father-in-law, Colonel Will, had to buy him books. The only thing, just read all day long. Career Marine. Sacred Duty, A Soldier's Tour at Arlington National Cemetery. Terrific book. Go and get that. But if you really have someone special in your life, scholarship them to The Wild Adventure, twa.us. My friend Jan Janura has been running these fishing trips in Montana for 40-plus years. I've been 3 times. My friend Rhett Rasmussen, who does Solera Grills, there's a great Christmas present. One of the hibachi grills that you could take out and do a tailgate with. Solera infrared grills are the best, whether it's this little one or like I've got on my backyard, the big one. Solera infrared grills is a great. Rhett went on me. Glenn Byers went with me. Dan, my brother-in-law, went with me. All sorts of people have been with me on the Wild Adventure and all come back saying that was the best week of my life. So if you love someone in your life, any man from 21 on up, you cannot go father and son. You have great time fly fishing, terrific food, terrific fellowship. You read Wild at Heart. You talk about it. It's just a great opportunity to turn everything off, get deep into yourself. We'll talk with Jan next week about it. But you can go now, and I'm just warning you early. TWA.us always sells out, and then people are mad at me for not giving them the early warning. This year, before I even tell you about a thing, I'm telling you about the Wild Adventure, TWA.us, and spouses, send your husbands. Fathers, send your sons. Sons, send your fathers. The best Christmas gift. It's not inexpensive, but it is very deeply discounted by Jan. It's a ministry for him. He sees what it has done in the lives of so many people over 40 years. to get out and into the wild and to learn the art of sports, of fly fishing. You don't have to know a thing. I certainly didn't when I became a pro, fished out the Madison. But even Dwayne caught a fish, which was remarkable. Dwayne went, I didn't go with him. He went by himself, and the guys actually liked him. I talked to him later. TWA.US. My interview with Matthew Elliott on Brexit is posted at HughHewitt.com. While you're there, make sure you click on The War for America's Soul. You can watch that. You can see all of the Salem talent out talking over the last 3 weeks, barnstorming the country. That's why I actually am informed about my opinion, because I solidify. Anecdotes are not evidence, but evidence is solidified by anecdotes. So you talk to enough people, you realize Donald Trump's numbers are high and climbing because America's with him on this impeachment sham show trial. And Tony Sayegh's conversation with me also being transcribed as we speak. And you can see my Things I Don't Understand tweets and read all about it, get everything done. But don't forget, most important of all, the Salvation Army Red Kettle is open and swinging throughout the day. Thank you, thank you, thank you in advance. God bless you all. And come back tomorrow for the Tuesday edition of Big Game Week, because we all know who's going to win on Saturday, and we all pray for the Browns on Sunday. Stay tuned, America, to this great radio station. I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.